And it is starting. Hello and welcome. We are Leadership 326 and we are Group A, and we will be doing a case study highlighting President Bashir al-Assad as an unethical leader. My name is Michelle Davis, and thank you for joining us. Go ahead and talk, Jessica.
Oh, I thought I was second. I'm sorry. I thought you were presenting your stuff.
I was just introducing myself.
I'm sorry. I suck at live stuff. I'm sorry. Do it one more time. I thought you were going to record your saying. Okay.
So I'm gonna start
We're
from the
introducing
beginning,
ourselves.
and then I'll edit off that first section. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we'll start from the beginning.
I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay. All right. Well, that was test number one. Take number two. Take number two. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Leadership 326, a case study in unethical leaders. My name is Michelle Davis, and for this case study, we will be presenting on Bashir al-Assad, president of Syria, as an unethical leader.
I'm Jessica Walker, and I am talking about the violations of ethical principles and if it was a case of a toxic relationship.
Hello, I'm Summer Johnson, and I will be talking about our takeaways on how unethical behavior is harmful to those who are around unethical leaders.
Great. So thank you again for joining us. I will be doing a screen share because we'd like to provide you with a little bit of background about President Assad to give you a baseline for what it is that we came to how it is that we came to our determination regarding his unethical leadership style.
Syria's war is a mess. After 6 years, the conflict is divided between 4 sides, each side with foreign backers, and those foreign backers don't even agree with each other on who they're fighting for and who they're fighting against. And now, Syria's use of chemical weapons has provoked President Donald Trump to directly attack Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This is a major development because up until now, the US has only been focused on fighting ISIS. To understand the crisscrossing interventions and battle lines in Syria today and how it got this way, it helps to go back to the beginning of the conflict and watch to see how it unfolded. The first shots in the war were fired in March 2011 by Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad against peaceful Arab Spring demonstrators. In July, the protesters start shooting back, and some Syrian troops even defect from the Syrian army to join them. They call themselves the Free Syrian Army, and the uprising becomes a civil war. Extremists from around the region and the world start traveling to Syria to join the rebels. Now, Assad actually encourages this by releasing jihadist prisoners to tinge the rebellion with extremism and make it harder for foreign backers to support them. In January 2012, Al-Qaeda forms a new branch in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra. Also around that time, Syrian Kurdish groups who had long sought autonomy take up arms and informally secede from Assad's rule in the north. That summer is when Syria becomes a proxy war. Iran, Assad's most important ally, intervenes on his behalf. And by the end of 2012, Iran is sending daily cargo flights and has hundreds of officers on the ground. At the same time, the oil-rich Arab states in the Persian Gulf begin sending money and weapons to the rebels, mainly to counter Iran's influence. Iran steps up its influence in turn in mid-2012 when Hezbollah, a Lebanese militia backed by Iran, invades to fight along Assad. In turn, the Gulf states respond, Saudi Arabia really stepping up this time to send more money and weapons to the rebels, this time through Jordan, who also opposes Assad. By 2013, the Middle East is divided between mostly Sunni powers generally supporting the rebels and Shias generally supporting Assad. That April, the Obama administration, horrified by Assad's atrocities and the mounting death toll, signs a secret order authorizing the CIA to train and equip Syrian rebels. But the program stalls. At the same time, the US quietly urges Arab Gulf states to stop funding extremists, but their requests basically go ignored. In August, the Assad regime uses chemical weapons against civilians, provoking condemnation from around the world.
children lying in rows, killed by poison gas. It is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike.
Russia proposed on Monday that Syria surrender control over its chemical weapons to the international community for its eventual dismantling to avoid a U.S. military strike.
The U.S. ends up backing down, but the whole thing establishes Syria as a great powers dispute, with Russia backing Assad and the U.S. opposing it. Just weeks later, the first American CIA training in arms reached Syrian rebels. The U.S. is now a participant in the war. In February 2014, something happens that transforms the war. An al-Qaeda affiliate based mostly in Iraq breaks away from the group over internal disagreements. The group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, and it becomes al-Qaeda's enemy. ISIS mostly fights not Assad, but other rebels and Kurds, carving out a mini-state it calls its caliphate. That summer, it marches across Iraq, seizing territory and galvanizing the world against it. In September, 1 year after U.S. almost bombed Assad, it begins bombing ISIS.
We're moving ahead with our campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists, and we're prepared to take action against ISIL in Syria as well.
That summer, in July, the Pentagon launches its own program to train Syrian rebels, but will only train those who will fight ISIS, not Assad. The program fizzles, showing that America now opposes ISIS more than Assad, but that there's also no like-minded Syrian proxy forces on the ground in Syria. In August, Turkey starts bombing Kurdish groups in Iraq and in Turkey, even as these Kurdish groups are fighting ISIS in Syria. But Turkey doesn't bomb ISIS. This gets to one of the big problems in this conflict. The US sees ISIS as its main enemy, but the US's allies like Turkey and a lot of Middle Eastern states have other priorities. This makes for a lot of unclear and confusing alliances. The next month, in September, Russia intervenes on behalf of Assad, sending a few dozen military aircraft to a long-held Russian base in the country. Russia says it's there to bomb ISIS, but in fact only ends up bombing anti-Assad rebels, including some backed by the US. The next year, Donald Trump wins the White House, vowing to stay out of Syria and signaling that Assad should be able to stay in power. At the end of 2016, Assad, helped by Russian air power and Iranian-sponsored militias, retakes the Syrian city of Aleppo, knocking the rebels out of their last remaining urban stronghold. Then, in spring 2017, Assad once again uses chemical weapons against his people, killing 85, including 20 children. Back in the US, Trump says his attitude towards Syria and Assad has, quote, changed very much due to the attacks. He vows to respond, and within just a few days, the White House launches dozens of Tomahawk missiles that strike an airbase in Syria. This is the first time the United States has directly attacked the Assad regime. And this adds yet another crisscrossing complication to the already multidimensional civil war. So as it stands now, Syria is in ruins. Even as Assad recaptures land, the rebellion perseveres. And with outside countries fueling each of the groups, it's clear that there's still no end in sight.
So as you can see, this is a very complicated issue. We're dealing with a president who has been in office for well over 10 years, who has developed a series of incidences that has brought the attention of the world to him. So bear with me right now while I share our main presentation. Thank you. So how did we evaluate our leader? We looked at the couple of criteria. We looked at the individual's conduct and his character. We took into consideration some of the philosophies of ethics for conduct-based theories. We're looking at deontological theories, which have to do with honor or duty. And we're talking about, did his actions show something that was honorable or dishonorable? Did his actions represent an interest for himself or did it just represent an interest for others? Also, in the teleological, which is another path of conduct-based, we're looking at the consequences of his actions. Were those consequences honorable? Were they have a positive effect? We also looked at his character. In a character-based theory for ethics, and when we talk about a person is either ethical or unethical, we look at their virtue or their morals. What we do understand about character-based theory is it's a trait-based theory, but we also understand that traits aren't necessarily inherent in the person. They can be taught. Aristotle brought up to this particular philosophy that there are several specifics in a good person or an ethical person. They have courage and temperance and generosity. They have modesty and fairness and justice. And so when we looked at this theory and we based that kind of reflected back on President Assad, we were able to make the determination that this particular individual is very unethical in his, not only his behavior, but in his character. So he professes that he wishes to move his country into a democratic nation, but in 2000 he took office without ever having an election just after his father passed away. And then in 2000 up through 2007, and then 2007 there was not even an election. It was just he took office without any opposition at all because people were too afraid to run against him. He publicly denies any allegations of chemical attacks on his own people, and he publicly denies any allegations of violence against the rebels, the ISIS terrorists or the Kurds. But we have physical witnesses showing that there were chemical attacks in the rebel area. There were deaths of civilians, and there are witnesses to the deployment of the aircraft that went and did the bombings.
First, I'm going to discuss what ethics is defined as and what an ethical leader should look like. Ethics is described as being concerned with the kinds of values and morals an individual or a society finds desirable or appropriate, and is concerned with the virtues of an individual or their motives. As a leader, the choice you make and how you respond to any given situation is all based off of your ethics as a person. Next slide. On the other side of being an ethical leader, there is toxic relationship. Toxic relationship is described as the dark side of leadership, where leaders are destructive and toxic to those around them. Some destructive behaviors, such as leaving followers worse off than where they started and violating somebody's basic human rights. Some personal characteristics for destructive leaders are lack of integrity, instabilable ambition, arrogance, reckless disregard for their actions. And sometimes you will find those people who are ambitious to do whatever it takes, no matter if it describes and bombing your own country to gain that leadership. Next slide. As we look at President Assad and some of the choices he has made as a leader of Syria, we start to see a downward spiral, someone who thinks they are doing what is best for their country by defending and attacking the rebels that are invading his country. In doing so, he has been accused of bombing and chemically attacking his own people, although he has denied this on several occasions over the past 6 years. It is clear to the United States that he is responsible. His choices have led to almost 500,000 deaths. Assad is fighting against the ISIS, the rebels, and other countries backing them. Because of all the people in play and motives for trying to take over, Assad uses ruthless tactics that hinders anyone else from taking his presidential title. Remaining in control and doing whatever to ensure he is the one in charge is a very self-centered act, and not caring what happens to his people displays toxic leadership. Switch slides. With no end in sight, the civil war in Syria still continues. You would think the longer the war lasts and the more people that are killed, the general population would want to leave the country or join the competitor's side. The thing with toxic leadership is that it promotes followers who have unmet needs and low core self-evaluations. You may also find those types of people are ambitious to gain more power. Switch slides. There are 5 basic principles of ethical leadership: respect, service, justice, honesty, and community. Assad has violated the majority of these, if not all of them. Chemically attacking his own people violates all principles. Helping to defend his country would help to build a strong community, and instead he rips it apart with those bombing and chemical attacks. With bombings and attacks, death happens. I know with wars, death is to be expected, but by attacking his own people and then denying that he had any part violates the principle of honesty. People do not feel safe anymore, and over 22 million people have fled the country for his harsh retaliation and ruthless leadership. Next slide.
So, according to my research, President Assad was not the first choice to lead Syria. After his father died, his older brother was next in line, but soon after was killed in a car accident. Assad was a doctor and is often seen as a polite and soft-spoken leader. Yet behind closed doors, he is described having an erratic and delusional personality. This is not what a leader of a much divided country should be acting like. In an interview after Trump had launched his missiles on Syria, Assad went so far to say the videos we had seen were fake, and it was the work of terrorism that made children play dead and look like chemical warfare was being spread among the Syrian people. He went on to say that to stop terrorism like ISIS, foreign countries will need to back him and his military regime full 100%. Next slide. As we've read in our leadership theory and practice, there are 10 characteristics of a leader should have, especially in a position of power like a president. Some of these are integrity, determination, self-confidence, and sociability. I truly believe that Assad possesses these traits, but uses them in a negative manner to gain more power, more money, and more greed. Although Assad can appear sound-minded, he is not to be underestimated. I believe he has learned over the years the very traits, skills, and behavior to influence people, but in an unethical way. The need to force control over his country has not only killed thousands of people, but it has also involved the main world leaders to keep peace. Assad has now resulted to the ultimate level of fear to lead his country. Next slide. President Assad has taken leadership to a new level of coercion and toxic actions. Using chemical warfare on his own people to gain control and rake in the money is the truest example of how effective leadership can turn bad quickly. This situation has been more complicated than any situation in the history of war. For leaders, due to terrorist groups being funded by foreign powers, how can you lead your country? It would be hard for anybody to lead their country the way you want when you're owned by different foreign groups and other countries like Russia. The people of Syria support Assad because of the fear of traditionalists taking over outweighs the fear of being under a dictator. And who's to say the situation is because of all the influence from other countries? Assad has gone so far to say that chemicals used on his people did not come from him, but the terrorist groups, and the US has just butted their nose into a situation where they don't belong. In conclusion, maybe Syria can be a democracy one day. Hopefully the war on terrorism can be won and peace can be felt amongst the people of Syria. The leadership that will piece this country back together will be an authentic and servant leadership combined with a strong foundation against terrorism. Whomever overthrows President Assad should have values that drive compassion and consistency. The authentic leader will need to earn the trust of the people and create a purpose for the people to build trust and hope. This leader will also need to have a servant heart. The Syrian people have lived in the lowest of conditions. The new Syria would need someone to heal and have foresight to rebuild the community. Unfortunately, many leaders have called for an assassination of President Assad, and there is no guarantee that the next president would be any better. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to our presentation. Our prayers and hopes always go out to the people of Syria. We hope that at some level their leader can either become an authentic leader, or there can be a democratic election that would allow their leader to come in and be more democratic in his views and help the Syrian people. Thank you and have a good night.